Well, I'm so glad you asked. I have good news. So Kamala HQ is turning into headquarters, and it's where you can go online to get basically the latest of what's going on, and also to meet and revisit with some of our great, courageous leaders, be they elected leaders, community leaders, civic leaders, faith leaders, young leaders. I'm really excited about it. So stay engaged, and I'll see you out there. Thank you.
Okay. So is she running? Is that an announcement or a nod toward her running? That is the question folks are asking. After that Kamala Harris 2024 campaign release of a video rebranding her 2024 campaign social media accounts as headquarters. It is part of an effort for Democrats to try to catch up with Republicans on the digital media front and connect with voters online. Harris, again, has not ruled out a run in 2028. Joining us, staff writer for The Atlantic and MS Now, political analyst Ashley Parker. Stu Stevens said he'd stick around for us as well. Ashley, what do you make of that? So you can just go there and get everything you need and hear from people and what else?
Yeah, I will confess I don't fully understand it. I've talked to some other Democratic operatives who like the vice president and also don't fully understand it. But, some of that seems a little bit by design. They released a teaser last night. Then there's this video. It feels like at some point they're going to have to explain a bit more of what this is, or we're just going to actually get to see it in action. But it does seem like a very real effort to start a real community and a discussion, and whether it's a successful effort, I don't know.
Is she going to run for governor, you think? Is it not president? Maybe it's governor? California?
I think if she runs for something, it's president. And I will say I was just in Richmond on Monday, actually, where she is doing this latest leg of her book tour. And, crowd size is not everything, but the crowds that gathered to see her early were long lines. They were there early. It was a lot of Black women, which is the base or important base of the Democratic Party. So I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people who don't think she should run again for president. But as you put out, she hasn't ruled it out. And at the very least, she's keeping herself relevant in the conversation. And she's not a lame duck potential candidate until she actually makes a decision.
I wonder if it's also trying to combat maybe Gavin Newsom, who's very heavily online right now and is leading the pack and has a real digital strategy. He's got a popular podcast. He's trolling the president. He's certainly peaking right now. You can argue about whether it's not a good idea to peak this early on. But I wonder if this is an attempt to get into the pool so Newsom's not there playing alone. Stu.
Look, I mean, to run for president and win, you have to run. And I think what she's saying is that I may run. I'm out here. I'm a viable candidate. Ashley knows this so well. She covered the Romney campaign. A lot of running for president is a battle of wills. There aren't a lot of people out there who are unbiased who say, you should run, you're going to win. I don't know who, if they showed up in Richmond, would have drawn a bigger crowd than she did. And I think the buyer's remorse with Trump, we were talking about this earlier with, say, just Hispanic voters, but across the way, look at independents. There's tremendous buyer's remorse. And I think that this notion that the 24 election was a realignment election has been proven to be completely false. It was a change election, just as the next election will be. It was a very difficult election for an incumbent to win. I actually think the Harris campaign ran a very good campaign. They lost. That happens. That should happen in politics. That's part, in a democracy, somebody has to be willing to lose. But I think she's a tremendously appealing candidate. You never know what's going to happen until you get out there. I mean, that was part of the problem. She was just sort of anointed. She didn't have to go through a primary. Now she will. As far as whether or not she should have done this or not, every campaign I've ever been involved in, there's all this debate about how to announce, and then 2 months later, nobody remembered how you announced. So it's not going to matter.
I mean, we're talking about her, which is a success in and of itself. We're having the conversation. Just moving on to Gavin Newsom here, and that Vanity Fair shoot, we just showed an image from it, an Annie Leibovitz image of it. Actually, it reminds me of the Beto O'Rourke image from early on before, what was it, 2020? Maybe it was out in early 2019 or something.
Yeah.
It seemed like Beto O'Rourke was like a shoo-in for the nomination. He was so popular, from Texas, so charismatic, and we saw how that turned out.
I mean, I hate to say that candidates should not participate with media interviews and photos because it will somehow jinx them. So that's not going to be my talking point here. I always think more participation is better. But I'm struck by two things. I'm struck by sort of how much I hear unsolicited from Democrats, both voters and activists and strategists, that they like what Gavin Newsom is doing now in terms of getting out there and essentially kind of trolling Trump, as he would put it, fighting fire with fire, kind of standing up. They think Democrats want a fighter. And I am also struck by how many candidates who felt like a presumptive front runner early on sometimes did not even make it past Iowa, or went down in ways that are very surprising. Stuart and I are both old enough to remember Jeb Bush, for instance. So it's fascinating. He's very compelling to a lot of people, and we are in the year 2026.
You could say Scott Walker as well. Bring him into it. I mean, the field is
Scott
littered
Walker,
with people.
Valenti, Ron DeSantis, yeah.
Yeah, who peak early and then don't go much farther than that. All right, Stu, thank you very much.
Well, I think he's sending a signal to John Ratcliffe that Senator Wyden has an issue, and he can't go public with the contents, but he can go public with the concern. And so he's putting John Ratcliffe on notice that there has to be some type of response that is going to come from the CIA. Now, we'll point out that Ron Wyden is a very liberal senator. And when I was CIA director, he had some concerns about things that CIA was doing that I thought were very appropriate. So there may be a difference of view here between Ron Wyden. Now, Ron is the longest serving member of the Intelligence Committee. He's there for 10 years. So I think he has come to understand and appreciate better what the CIA is doing. But quite frankly, in this administration, I cannot have any sense of what it is that Ron Wyden is concerned about. But I do think now it's incumbent upon John Ratcliffe to be able to respond and to be able to satisfy the concern. It's probably going to be in a very closed, classified briefing or an exchange, but clearly Ron Wyden wanted to make sure that the public was made aware of this so that the pressure would build on John Ratcliffe to respond.
I want to pick up on that because I love the succinctness of the senator's letter. He was very clear that, Houston, we have a problem, and I need Houston to pay attention to the problem. And so I thought that was very telling. And it was telling to me because, and I want to get your take on this specifically, because we've always been concerned about foreign actors engaging in U.S. Elections. And so it's not anything new, despite the fact that you have some in Washington who are trying to act like, oh, my God, this, the sky's falling, kind of, give us justification to do other things. But we've always had that. So contextualize for us what those efforts have been like in the past that have concerned you when you were CIA director looking at upcoming elections, because that's part of the purview. You don't have direct say, obviously. You didn't have a direct role like we see the DNI today engaging. But what are the things that our government typically have been concerned about that now seemingly should be back in view for concern, given how this administration has deconstructed so many of the assets and the ways in which we do monitor the behavior of Russia and China and Iran?
Well, efforts have been made over the past decade, if not more, to try to harden our technical systems to prevent any type of technical interference so that the number of votes would be adjusted or somehow the tally would be changed. But the concern of the intelligence community certainly has been that information operations that the Russians or the Chinese, the Iranians, or any number of other countries could in fact engage in order to change the ultimate outcome of the vote by influencing American voters.
The way people may vote.
Right, yeah, by putting out disinformation, misinformation, or whatever. And that's what the Russians have been doing over the past number of presidential elections, amplifying real information that maybe is going to serve their purposes, maybe adjusting some of the information that's out there to fabricate some other things. So the Russians are very adept, as are the Chinese and others. So the intelligence community has to be constantly vigilant to see what these foreign actors are doing, frequently inside of our country, because they put out these personas and using social media, whatever, presenting themselves as a farmer from Iowa, but actually it is something that's coming out of the Russian intelligence services as a way, again, to influence the perceptions, the impressions, and ultimately the votes of American citizens.
Who's better at it?
Better at the disinformation?
Who's better at the disinformation?
Well, I think the Russians have the most experience. They do it across the board. They do it certainly across Europe and other areas. And, in the past, before we had this digital environment, they would do it through magazine articles and newspapers and journalists and others. Now the digital environment is so available to them to be able to manipulate, again, the perceptions, the personas that are out there. And they really have gone to school over the last decade in order to perfect their ability to influence U.S. voter attitudes. And so this is something that I think we really have to be mindful of. And unfortunately, I think that the Trump administration still, and Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge that Russia was interfering in the 2016 election. But this is something that the Russians do, and do it constantly, and they do it very well.
Director Brennan, earlier this week, we reported on a whistleblower complaint at the DNI that had been stalled. We are learning that Congress received a redacted version of that complaint against Tulsi Gabbard. I want you to take a listen to what Senator Mark Warner had to say about that complaint.
It took the Gang of Eight 6 months of negotiation with the Director of National Intelligence to share that whistleblower complaint. This is in direct contradiction to what Gabbard testified during her confirmation hearings, that she would protect whistleblowers and share the information in a timely manner. The idea that she held back for 6 months a bipartisan request from the Gang of Eight is one more example of somebody that's in way over her head in this job.
So as I understand it, Intel workers, they can file one of these complaints. They can go to the Inspector General of the DNI. If they go outside, they have the risk of facing criminal charges. Which alarm flags does it raise to you that this whistleblower complaint was not moved through the proper channels?
Well, several concerns. As Senator Warner said, it contradicts her public testimony that she gave to the committees when she was up for the position of the Director of National Intelligence. It's inconsistent with the law. There are statutes that require this delivery of whistleblower complaints to the Congress and through the appropriate channels. And then, as you point out, the whistleblower arrangements are intended to give individuals within the intelligence community an approved mechanism to be able to express concerns about something they have seen or something they have witnessed that they believe is either a criminal activity or inconsistent with the law, or something that they really want to be able to raise to those oversight committees of Congress. And there's really no excuse that it took so many months. It should have and could have been done much more quickly. And so I think Senator Warner and others are going to be investigating exactly why it's taken that long. Are there other whistleblower complaints that are out there that are preventing individuals from raising concerns? As we know, the intelligence community is so critically important to our national security. And if individuals do not have the opportunity, the legitimate and legal opportunity to express concerns about what's going on, we really are in a world of hurt.
Andrew, when you have the ghost of Venezuelan presidents past somehow factoring into present-day elections, you know you're already in Looney Tunes land. But to your point about the fact that this isn't really retrospective, that is all there to set a predicate for what can and may happen in the future. You had Steve Bannon on his own podcast giving a preview of how he at least sees this potentially playing out. Take a listen.
You're damn right. We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. We're not going to sit here and allow you to steal the country again. And you can whine and cry and throw your toys out of the pram all you want, but we will never again allow an election to be stolen.
Okay, so I understand he's a podcaster. He's a provocateur. Take all of this with a few grains of salt. And yet, when you watch what is unfolding in Minneapolis and other American cities, it becomes clear that the possibility of armed force, the possibility of national officers being deployed for things that are beyond their scope of work is possible or probable depending on your vantage point.
So, when I was saying look forward, I want to make clear that's just not my speculating about what, concerns me. The Wall Street Journal last week, when this happened, talked about that Tulsi Gabbard would be anticipated to issue a report, that there would be executive orders that could come from that. I think a really fair question for journalists to be putting to Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, is something I am concerned about, is whether they will simply go in and try to seize ballots in either blue states or blue cities on a claim of this is evidence that they need for allegations of fraud. Will they try and tamper with elections? Will they enforce the criminal statute that says that it's illegal to send in armed forces to surround an election? We rarely have had to deal with that statute because, fortunately, in this country, that's not been a possibility. But now we are seeing that being floated by the president and his allies. And I think those are really important questions for the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to answer. And if they don't answer it, it tells us that these kinds of concerns that are being raised, not just here, but but also the Wall Street Journal. So think of that, MS Now and the Wall Street Journal focusing on the same issue because of what we're seeing going on and the comments being made by this administration.
It strikes me, Christy Greenberg, that when Donald Trump has used his Department of Justice to go after some of his most outspoken critics, one of the reasons that their attorneys have been able to make the case for selective prosecution is that Donald Trump forecasted all of it either on social media platforms or in interviews. So when he is in this interview with Tom Yamas at NBC News, and he's specifically naming American cities, I would note American cities that tend to have large black populations, American cities that have Democratic leadership, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta. Does that have any legal salience, the fact that he is forecasting? And I mean, again, we've watched this play out so many times. Yes, he may be asked, have you had a conversation directly with AG Bondi about this? He does not need to. He's on one of the largest platforms in American media forecasting what it is he wants.
Right. And as you said, this is exactly what would go into any brief to challenge his actions, because he forecasts it. He tells you exactly what he's going to do. There are plenty of things he lies about, but there are plenty of times where he is completely transparent. And this is one of them. He is telling you the target cities. Those are blue cities. It's no surprise that that's where he is looking. And, I think it's so interesting because will he go and seize ballots? Well, it seems like he's going to find the fraud later, after the fact, after he figures out whether or not those cities went for him or not. That's what's so fascinating about the fact that, again, he's quiet about 2024 because he won that election. I mean, it's so transparently ridiculous and absurd on its face. So when he's saying these things, look, I think this Department of Justice has shown they are willing to play ball. Their mantra is not what the law says. It's what would Donald Trump do? What does he want us to do? And whatever we think that is, that's what we'll do.
The fraudsters just took off in 2024. They needed a break. They didn't need to worry about it so much, Stephen. And Stephen, I think part of the challenge of talking about all of this, one of the things that hopefully we have all learned from the past few years is that if anything, we've had a failure of imagination about what it is Donald Trump is willing to do in order to dismantle this democracy. You had what I thought was a brilliant piece in the New York Times, sort of anticipating and supposing one of those many ways. Let me read you some of your own writing. Recently, a number of states have undertaken investigations into non-citizen voting, cross-checking voter rolls with citizenship status, and found it virtually non-existent. Playing politics with the idea of fraudulent voters and stolen elections comes at a real cost to American confidence in our elections. It's an affront to our democracy and to all those who work to deliver fair and free elections. It's also an ominous sign for where things may be heading this year. Again, I think when we talk about the immigration enforcement that we have seen all over this country, it's never really been about immigration. It is fundamentally about challenging the rule of law. And there is a very direct line that we can draw from this mass deportation machine to an administration that wants to use some of the same armed officers to reckon with American elections.
Yeah, and you'll see more and more that some of the allegations coming from the president, some of the allegations coming from this new administration are just as crazy as stuff that you might see on social media in the internet. But again, it's coming from government, which is a pretty wild phenomenon. And I think that's going to supercharge people's distrust and disconfidence in the election process. Now, I don't know to what end. I don't know, again, as you said, if it's just chaos for chaos' sake, doubt for doubt's sake, or if it's towards some particular goal, some particular federal government involvement. But what I concluded at the end of that article was that I couldn't have possibly predicted that the FBI was going to seize 2020 election material from Fulton County. I couldn't have possibly predicted January 6, 2021. And so I perhaps need to get in a more imaginative state to be able to be helpful in whatever's coming next.
And as Andrew reminded us earlier, we don't even need to fully use our imaginations because there is already reporting telling us some of exactly what they plan to do.
If you look at the DOJ, they announced, they released 3 million pages. It's like this is all they're supposed to be doing. And frankly, the DOJ, I think, should just say, we have other things to do.
Donald Trump openly calling for the Department of Justice to get back to his agenda in the wake of the latest release of the Epstein files. And a large part of that agenda, as we've seen, is his revenge tour against his perceived political enemies. Among the targets are the 6 members of Congress who posted a video urging members of the military and the intelligence community to refuse illegal orders and stand up for the Constitution, which is actually what the law prescribes. And of course, Trump didn't like that. He accused the lawmakers of, quote, seditious behavior punishable by death. Punishable by death. He put that out on his social media feed. And he reposted calls from supporters to hang those Democratic members. The Department of Justice has now opened investigations of those folks, including Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, a former CIA analyst, demanding that she comply with a voluntary interview. Today, Senator Slotkin rejected the DOJ's request to cooperate and is considering suing the administration.
They are purposely using physical and legal intimidation to get me to shut up. But more importantly, they're using that intimidation to deter others from speaking out against their administration. The intimidation is the point, and I'm not going to go along with that.
Senator Alyssa Slotkin, a Democrat of Michigan, joins me now. Senator, good to see you. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Can you lay out what the DOJ wants of you and what you've told them?
Well, first the FBI and then the Department of Justice, contacted us late last year and again right after Christmas break, wanting us to sit down for an interview as part of an inquiry. And, I think it's hard not to interpret that, when the president of the United States tweets over a dozen times that you should be investigated, arrested, and ultimately hanged, that, it was a direct response to the commander in chief pushing that agenda. So obviously we had to hire lawyers, and you need to figure out a whole strategy. And we've been talking to the Department of Justice lawyers, but they kept pushing and kept coming for this interview. And we just made the decision. I'm not gonna just comply when something is so obviously an attempt to weaponize the federal government.
It's also not legally dubious ground. I mean, you and your fellow members of Congress who made that video, you didn't call on anyone to do anything unlawful.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 90-second video that simply restated existing law that if you're in the military, you have the responsibility to refuse illegal orders. That's part of the U.S. law. Yes. So, and it's all in the open. We didn't do anything undercover, and I talk about it openly. So in a country that believes so firmly in freedom of speech, it seems a little crazy to most people I talk to, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. But I think they, like I said, they really are using this like legal intimidation, physical intimidation as well, but legal intimidation to sort of paper you over and get you to be quiet. And there were certainly smart people in December who were telling me, hey, just like keep a low profile, sit on your hands, don't agitate, and hopefully this whole thing will go away. And, you know, when your family's being physically threatened, you take a beat and you think about that. And so, you know, over Christmas break, obviously, most people are not talking about news. I wasn't, you know, doing anything political. And I came back, and January 5th or something, here comes another letter and another request for interview. So sitting on your hands and keeping a low profile actually doesn't help. It's the opposite. And so we just decided to go on offense and make them tap dance a little bit.
And you have said that the DOJ should retain its records on this.
Yeah.
Because you are prepared to put them on their back feet.
Yeah, I mean, technically, you know, if we were keeping our options open for suing them for infringement of my constitutional rights. It's just freedom of speech. It's basic founding father stuff. So in line with the law, we asked them to retain those records. And you know, I think it's important because, you know, the Supreme Court has basically said, well, when a president is in the Oval Office, he can do almost anything. But they have no such immunity and no such permissions for the people who are doing the president's bidding. And I think it's important that people understand that there can be consequences when you use this political, you know, when you politicize the federal government and the justice system.
Yeah, and you don't have to actually be a PhD in history you don't even have to go back to Richard Nixon. There have been lots of examples of people who do president's bidding who don't get the protections of a president. There are a lot of enablers around this president as it relates to the carrying out of his wishes through the Department of Justice, through ICE, through CBP, through the FBI.
Yeah, I think, look, he couldn't be doing what he was doing without just legions of people who are just saluting and saying, yes, sir, without thinking about either the morality, the legality, the ethics, the long-term consequences to the country. I mean, I think, you know, I think that's the thing that we've lost here. And you know, I recently lost my father, and there's no one in the world who taught me more about right from wrong. Just, you know, he was a lifelong Republican, had very different political views, but there is a right and there's a wrong, and it's just like people have lost their moral compass. And it's so many times a day, so many times a week that we sort of lose sensitivity to it. But there is a right and wrong. And we don't weaponize the federal government and the justice system against people exercising freedom of speech.